Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sue, how are you?
I'm doing great.
So today's topic for this session, we're going to be talking about increasing VOC program value through journey management. This was actually a topic that Sue and I both gave at our customer conference in Austin a month or so ago, and it was actually standing in room only. A lot of people couldn't get in. A lot of people didn't see it, and some people missed it because there were competing sessions. But because it was so popular, we decided to do it again. So Sue's graciously agreed to join us for this webinar for people that weren't able to make it the first time. So we can go ahead and get started, and we can maybe pop up the slides if they're not showing already. Perfect. So let's get into introductions first before we get into the topic. So welcome, everybody. My name is Raj Sivasubramanian. I lead the journey management and CX consulting business here at Question Pro. Prior to my stint at Question Pro, I've been in this CX space for 15 plus years. I've led VoC and built programs at places like Airbnb, eBay. Been a consultant advising a number of clients on how to go build out VoC programs. So this idea of increasing VoC program value is really top of mind and important to me. So looking forward to this discussion around how we can help you think about using journey management techniques to increase your VoC program value. But Sue, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks, Raj. Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Hamry-Smith, and it was such an honor to speak at the conference with Question Pro down in Austin, Texas. And it was just great to meet all of the team members there, and I had a wonderful time. And so I'm thrilled to at least participate a second time in this format. Most of my career was in the operations center, so heavy on logistics. I prided myself on basic problem solving while delivering operational excellence and then driving great customer experiences and telling the story about a customer to create a better outcome for them in the future. So I'm passionate about storytelling using customer information. I'm also a recent graduate from Michigan State University, which is where I met Raj. He was one of my instructors at Michigan State. And so I'm a recent graduate from the Customer Experience Management program there. And I'm just going to give a high recommendation for Raj and his class, and also for the program in general. If you have any questions about Michigan State's CXM program, I would be happy to discuss that with you at a later time. Back to you, Raj.
Thanks, Sue. And thank you for plugging the program. I completely forgot to plug that as well. So hopefully Tom DeWitt, who leads up the program, will forgive me for forgetting to mention that. But I'm glad you brought it up. But yeah, again, if you are interested in learning more, reach out to one of us. It is a great program. It is where I met Sue. And one of the reasons why I actually asked Sue to join me for this webinar and the X-Day conference was because of the great dialogue that Sue brought to my class. So the class I taught was about building VoC programs, measuring the experience. And Sue just brought a lot of real life examples from the airline industry, from her vast experience there. So as we were preparing for the conference and this topic, the thought was, how do we think about journey management techniques to improve VoC program value, right? Because a lot of companies that I've worked for, that I've helped, that have VoC programs, they capture a lot of insight, they do a lot of great work, but where they struggle is to actually go drive action based on the customer feedback. And as a result, their value tends to get diminished over time, right? And journey management techniques and companies that have employed them have been more successful in ensuring their VoC teams have more value, right? So we're going to walk through that today. And with Sue being here, I did want to use the airline industry as an example, because for one, I think if you think about journey mapping and journey management, airline industry examples, they're interesting in the sense that there's a lot of different journeys and a lot of different personas, which we'll talk about during the course of this session. But they're also topics that most people can understand. And then Sue has so many great real life examples that we'll go through. So what we're going to do is I'll go through some techniques that some leaders have used well. I'll show you how Question Pro's platform can help you think about journey management. And then throughout the course of the conversation, we'll bring Sue in for a lot of different anecdotes around journey management. Okay, can we pull the slide back up? Yeah, thank you. So, what I want to, before we get into it, I want to just share some fun anecdotes about myself and my own experience flying. Right, so I talked about different experiences flying, how you can have different personas experience different things, and I fly a lot. Right, so I do find the airline industry exciting and interesting. I fly as a business traveler. I fly for fun. I do a lot of different things. Right, so sometimes, I mean, I'll do something like I'll take my dog out on a flight, right? And that's a unique experience in itself, right? So when I'm traveling with a pet, that's a very different experience, right? And there's different pain points and different things that I encourage when I'm doing that. So here's my dog looking out on a recent flight. A lot of people have this experience of flying with kids, right? Which can be fun, but it can also be stressful, right? So I've had the experience where you got to wait for the baby to fall asleep. You got to get the older kids set up on watching a TV. I've had the experience where someone in front of me yells at my kid for making too much noise, right? So we've all kind of been there. We also have that experience when you are not traveling with kids and you're annoyed at other people's kids, right? So that's an experience there in itself. And then, sometimes you just want to sit back and have a couple drinks on the flight. In addition to this, I'll be working on trips as well, right? So there's a lot of different experiences that you can have, which again is why I think it's so fascinating, and it's a fascinating example to talk through. So what we're going to get into now is there's a lot of different journey management practices that teams can employ to try to drive action in an organization, and VoC and Insights teams that are successful in driving action, they employ a few common techniques, and we're not going to go through all of them today, but there's three that I want to focus on. So one is this idea around tailoring feedback and CX metrics to each stage of a customer journey. This is one place where I think the airline industry gets it really well, and we'll talk through what they do well there as we get into this. Secondly, we're going to talk about how to track persona-specific sentiment at key moments of truth, right? So I briefly touched on there's different personas of customers in the airline industry, and in whatever business all of you are in, you probably have different personas that have different needs, and you may not be tracking customer sentiment for every specific persona. So we're going to talk about why that's so important and how that can be powerful. And then lastly, really getting to how do you drive action. The companies that do this well have very specific closed loop processes that enable you to take those insights and then actually make recommendations specific to individual teams to really go drive the action to do that. And the Question Pro Journey Mapping platform can help with that. Okay, so let's get into the first one around tailoring feedback and metrics to each stage of a customer journey. So what we've constructed here is just a high-level view of the flying experience for our customer, right? And this is very high level, right? But there's different elements of what that journey looks like, right? So there's the pre-flight journey, which is mostly done offline, right? So that's booking a flight. You may or may not need to contact customer support, and then that is a sub-journey in itself that's going to have its own experiences. Then you've got the experience at the airport, which Sue will share some anecdotes in a little bit, but the airport experience is not something that an airline has complete control over. There's different elements of that experience at the airport, checking in, going through security, waiting at the gate. Then there's the in-flight experience, right? There's a lot of components of that. And then there's post-flight, where you might want to determine how loyal you are to that particular airline, and things like loyalty programs and stuff plays a part in that. The airline industry does a good job in collecting feedback differently across each of these stages, right? So in this early part of the journey, the pre-flight and then the airport, it's really impressive how they collect it in the moment, right? So you might be on an airline's website, you might get an intercept survey, you might contact customer support and get, I know Delta has a survey afterwards, rating an agent directly on the phone. There might be a chatbot survey. When you're in the airport, oftentimes you see these kiosks, right, where people can rate their experience at the airport, sometimes in the bathroom, which is interesting in its own way. But it's also always in the moment. And then after the fact, during the flight experience and after, it's often collected via email or other mechanisms. And again, it's really important to think about tailoring the way you collect feedback to each specific stage of the experience. And it's not that difficult to do, but a lot of organizations struggle to do that. I've seen too many companies just do an email survey for every single part of the experience, but it's really important to get it in the moment for certain types of experiences. So mapping out your journey will allow you to determine what the right way to capture feedback is. Similarly to that are CX metrics, right? So there's all kinds of different metrics that are out there. Too many organizations just use the same metric for everything, but it's really important to understand what is the right metric for each stage of an experience, right? So when you're on a website, maybe effort is the right metric. Down the road, when you want to understand total loyalty, NPS might be the better metric. And there's not one good metric for every single type of scenario, but it's important for you to understand what matters to your organization and your industry. And the other thing that's important is understanding the link between what we call survey-based metrics and then operational metrics, right? So it's important to capture a lot of operational metrics, and those can be very specific to your industry as well. So we've listed a few here, and I want to bring Sue in now to talk about how this has been done, because she alerted me in a recent conversation to this idea of customer stress, which is an operations metric that you guys had captured. So I'd love to hear more about how you've done that, and I think the audience would appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. You're right. There are so many things to capture. And when it comes to airline travel and other travel experiences, there are just so many different spots along the journey. And we tend to operate in silos by division. And so breaking through the cross-divisional silos to really understand what's happening in the customer's journey, specific points in the journey. One thing that we tried and we had a lot of success with, gained a lot of insight with, was we had over 100 volunteers, customer volunteers, that wore a Fitbit-like device to measure their heart rate. And we also gave these same customers electronic journals to capture insights along the day, the travel experience. And so what we found was pretty interesting that many of the customers had the same type of pain points at specific moments in the journey. And often it wasn't items that we could control. So for instance, one of the high stress points was 2 hours before departure time. They're not even in our hands yet, and it's high stress. They're trying to leave their home, and they're looking at the departure time of the flight thinking, I've got to get moving like right now. So it was a high stress point. And then as they parked their car and approached the airport, it was a little bit of a dip, but then as soon as they walked into the airport, it spiked. And that stress point spiked until they got through the TSA checkpoint. The TSA checkpoint, as we would imagine, would be high, but it was remarkably high for these customers. So we started to think, what can we do as an action, knowing that the walking through security is high stress, and yet we don't control that space. So we looked at things like holiday travel time. Of, okay, the security line is very long, and that we can't seem to get the TSA to focus on throughput of customers through the checkpoint. They're just working at their own space. So what can we do to simplify the matter for the customers? So we inserted people like myself, who were leaders in like backstage positions, who could step away from their desk and go to the airport and volunteer for a 4-hour shift or 6-hour shift with a little vest on that says, hi, I'm a volunteer. And we would space the bags. We would lift the bags up onto the TSA belt and explain to people in advance what the expectation was for them to just go through the TSA line. And you can imagine at holiday time frames, it's not the seasoned, it might not be the seasoned business traveler. It could be a family that they travel once a year and they've forgotten how this all works at the TSA checkpoint. So we could try to improve throughput at TSA just by responding to that stress level of what the Fitbit was telling us. Yeah. So going back to the Fitbit story, so the stress level comes down after they go through the TSA checkpoint, and then it levels off, and then it would spike a little bit again. And as they approached boarding, the boarding gate area was just a disaster. And I don't care what airline you fly on, we just can't get that boarding process right. It's high stress for everybody. And then once the customer would board on the plane, the second they boarded the plane, the stress level would drop. Even if the flight were a little bit delayed, the stress level would drop. And then it would be fine through the flight. In fact, the lowest part of stress along the customer journey was during the flight, which is interesting. Even if the flight was late and they might be risking their connection time.
I can see that.
They were in their hands, but they were in our hands.
Yeah, once you're sitting down, there's nothing you can do at that point, right?
Nothing you can do. We're going to take care of you. And then when we'd land, and then the customers would deplane, usually the stress point was medium until they got to baggage claim, and then it would spike again. And if they were trying to find Uber or Lyft, then it would increase again. So that was another insight that the airline could take. We can't control this. This is outside of our what we do. But if we can streamline that process for the customer to find Uber, Lyft, we can make their journey better. Yeah. So the Fitbit and the electronic diary study was really an interesting way for us to collect insights from customers.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. How did you determine who to give those Fitbits to?
We had a lot of customers who will say, who would volunteer themselves. I know many that would come to me and they would ask for a tour of my operations center, and they'd say, hey, if you ever need insights, specific, and I would ask them too, like, would you be interested in, if I can pick your brain about a few things, and we collect their names. And there were some people that with high response rates to surveys, that they approached. It wasn't my team that approached them, but
okay. And then what I love about that story is it's a great example of pulling together survey-based feedback and operational data points, right? So like you like you mentioned, people that took the surveys, what their sentiment is like, what they're telling you, but now you can also measure their stress level using the Fitbit as well. And again, I think that's a lesson for a lot of people listening is, you might not put together all your customers to wear Fitbits and monitor their stress, but I think what you guys did was so unique, and you came up with a very specific operational thing that you could measure that probably brought more color to the insight you got from your surveys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I gained a lot of that, and I used a lot of the feedback from the data points to sharing with my operations team. Even though my team wasn't frontline facing to the customers, they pulled a lot of levers behind the scenes. And so this allowed me to tell a story of why their work matters.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. Cool. So I think that's a good segue then to the next area. Right? So we talked about understanding the customer journey and measuring and capturing feedback differently across the journey. I think the next thing that's important then is, and you kind of alluded to this about understanding different personas, but tracking personas and tracking sentiment differently across the journey, right? And we'll explain why this is important. I'll show you some sample personas, right? So these are, I think a lot of airlines have personas like this. There might be others, but just to go through these quickly. The first one, right, is the persona of the person seeking a deal, right? It's probably someone not a lot of disposable income, just looking for the best price, young, travels with friends, right? So their specific needs are going to be unique. Then you've got the family traveler, right? The person that is probably looking to book 3 or 4 seats together, still looking for deals, but is looking out for their kids. Then you've got the status chaser as a persona, right? So the person that probably has loyalty to a single airline for both business and personal. Really getting that status end of the year is important. I know I've guilty of doing year-end mileage runs to try to maintain my status, right? And then the upgrades and that type of stuff is important to them. And then you got the road warrior as well. That is the business travel that's on the road a lot, right? So none of this should come as you don't even have to be in the airline industry to know that these are different types of customer personas. But I think what's important to understand is that, and I think when people think about personas in customer journeys, a lot of companies think about personas as like individuals are static, right? And an individual person fits a specific persona. I think when you think about airlines, and I want all of you to encourage us to think about in your organizations, you could have a single customer that actually could be multiple personas at multiple times, right? So if I think about myself personally, I've been every one of these personas at some point in my life. And then even right now, I mean, I'm probably not the deal seeker anymore, but I am the family traveler, I'm the status chaser, and I'm the road warrior. At any given time, like this year, I've been each one of these personas, and my needs vary depending on what persona I am at that time. So I think it's important when you think about your organizations to think about not just segmenting a customer and saying they're in this persona, thinking about the experience they're on at that moment. And that's why journey management is important, because if you can understand their persona, you actually can, at the time when they might give you feedback when they're on the journey, they might be in a different persona than they are at another time. Right. So how this looks like then when we think about it using the Question Pro platform and actually plotting out customer sentiment, what we do is we actually can track different personas, right? And then track how sentiment varies over time, right? So if you think about, so each one of these lines is a different persona, and then this dotted line here is the average of all the personas. The mistake that a lot of organizations make is they won't track sentiment by persona. They'll track sentiment for all of their customers, right? So we'll get survey feedback. I'm guilty of this, having done this at previous organizations, where we'll just say, hey, here's what customer sentiment is, and here's what people think. But the problem is when you do it at that average level, right? So look at this dotted line. It kind of looks like, okay, there's some spikes, but for the most part, sentiment's mostly neutral, right? So the way this graph works is the higher is positive, middle is neutral, down here is negative. The average kind of shows a spike here, maybe a low point here, but overall average sentiment. But then what you miss is these nuances, right? So you miss something like here. This is Robbie Road Warrior. He's got some negative sentiment about customer support, right? And then over here, our family travelers got some problems in flight, right? And when you look at the average, you miss that nuance. If you're able to track by sentiment, then you can actually dig deeper and find some things, right? So then you can go and look at some of the comments and you can find that, okay, here's a specific pain point for this person, right? So our road warrior feels like he's getting scripted responses. The airline doesn't value how much they fly, but nobody else seems to care about that, right? But now you've got a specific pain point for specific sentiment that you can go look at, right? And then here's another example for the Frank family traveler. It takes too long for food to reach them, right? But not every single person is going to care about that. So the important thing is if you look at personas and can track sentiment, you can find very specific things that might matter to one group versus the other, which allows your team to produce more insightful findings, right? So Sue, I don't know. I mean, I know you've got some good examples of stuff that maybe you've done looking at maybe certain pain points and how they might vary by persona. Do you have any examples you can share with the group?
Yeah, as you were speaking, Raj, a real life example is going on right now, and it's a customer that used to that toured my office about a year ago. And whenever he travels, even though I'm not working there anymore, he'll give me share the highs and the lows. And so he's a road warrior, but this week he's traveling with his family. And I can tell that his priorities have truly shifted. And unfortunately, fortunately, he and his family are on a trip to Australia. Unfortunately, his bags didn't make it for his kids. Wow. So his bags made it, his kids didn't make it. And so he's peppering me with questions, even though I'm not there anymore. Like, how did this happen? How did this happen? And so it's just interesting that he's a high status chaser person.
That's why his bags made it, because he's high status.
Yeah, so he's got the special tag on his bag.
Yeah,
but his kids' bags that were checked didn't have that same tag probably, and so maybe there's a different focus on it. So there's an opportunity there just by understanding that here's my status chaser person, high value customer, high value customer, but he's with his family whose bags don't have the same tags, but yet he's traveling with them, and there was a hiccup. And now there's this huge opportunity to fix it for him and his kiddos too, because that's going to leave an impression on his kiddos.
Yeah.
There's so much interesting elements with personas, and I think for my previous organization, the one thing that I wanted to stress with them is that personas keep changing, and so that these core personas that you have right now are probably good in 2024 and 5, but they're probably going to change going forward. Yeah. When we went through the pandemic, we were caught in a tailspin in so many ways, like all organizations, but the persona of our general traveling public really changed, and that was hard for us to get a grasp on it. It changed to that instead of business travelers going back and forth to New York or Austin or wherever, we would have a business traveler that would go to Lincoln, Nebraska and stay for 3 months and work remote. And that was like so off our radar. And so we were struggling. How do we adjust our flight schedules appropriately for where business travelers want to go? Business travelers are the bread and butter of the airline.
Yeah.
And so that was just really hard to figure out who are these people going to Lincoln, Nebraska or Omaha, and they would stay for 3 months, or they would go to Europe one way and bring their whole family with them, and we just couldn't figure out who they were. So that threw us for a tailspin. Now that the airline has recovered and the travelers are out there again, it's more in line with, the status chaser and the road warrior.
Yeah. But it's probably different than it was pre-pandemic, right? You probably have people were with more collaboration in Zoom. There's probably less travel now than there was pre-pandemic. So even that road warrior persona might be different looking than they were 5 years ago.
And another persona that's out there, or that probably has an opportunity to break down into different personas, is the future high value customer, the emerging high value customers. So the Amazon influencers, they're making a high value, they're making lots of revenue at home doing things on the internet. They're young. They've got all this income right now. It might not be there in 10 years, depending on how they save and whatnot, but how do we respond to them? Because they might not have that typical persona of your business traveler.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So there's a lot in this space to keep discovering.
Yeah, no, totally. That's there's a lot with personas, and I think so. We talked about metrics and feedback. We talked about tracking sentiment. I think that leads us now to the third point that I want to talk to, which is around developing closed loop processes to act on insights at each stage, right? And we've set this up. You can't just go and develop the processes, right? You need to make sure, step one, track your feedback and metrics at each stage. Step two, have the personas. And then once you do that, so let's come back to our visual here. What's important about journey management techniques is now, because you've identified pain points, but they're not broad pain points, right? They're very specific pain points. You can take very targeted recommended actions, right? So if you remember here, we talked about our road warrior friend, or the status chaser who had a bad experience with customer support. He felt the responses were scripted. So what you could do in the journey management platform, you track the sentiment, you have the negative response, and then you can go in and assign an action item, right? So in our platform, we've got an action planning tool where you can go in and tag a specific action for this particular pain point, right? So we know the road warrior is unhappy with scripted responses. So let's just say we can propose an action to say, let's route the road warrior to the most experienced agent who understands what he's doing, and then maybe give them the autonomy to open up first class seats that are typically held to the board. But here's a potential solution that, again, if you're working for an airline, you can say, hey, let's go make this specific action happen. Let's go create a dedicated line. Let's change the rules for what we do for these agents, but we'll do this for this specific persona at this specific stage, right? But by showing it in this view, you can actually make that recommended action. And then the journey management platform then connects to a project management outer loop tool where you can actually go track how someone is doing, and you can go assign a timeline for this, assign owners, and actually go track progress to make sure things are happening, right? Because that's one of the biggest things why when VoC teams make recommendations and things don't happen, it's because they're not very specific enough, right? And journey management allows you to have very specific actions that you can track accordingly. Here's another example. I kind of made this one up, but it's another example we talked about the in-flight experience. We got some feedback that food was taking too long. Maybe this is something, again, that you can think about sending promotions to families ahead of time, allow them to pre-order food that gets delivered shortly after takeoff. This could be offered only to our family traveler segment because we know it's important to them, and they might be more willing to buy into a promotion like that. Again, on the back end within a company, this is an easier recommendation to make sure it happens because it's very simple, it's very specific, and it's easier to track, right? So again, the whole action piece of it is not that complicated if you frame your insights and your sentiment in this journey management platform approach. One example I want to talk about that personal to me that I know a lot of people might have some takes on that I know, Sue, you've got an insider perspective on is Delta got a lot of feedback about a year or so ago, right, when they changed their Sky Miles program. So I got this email September of last year saying that they were introducing a simpler Sky Miles program, right? And the common joke with my family and friends is anytime you get an email from Delta saying something is simpler or something is better, it's usually their way of hiding the language that it's actually going to get worse, but they paint it as simpler. And what they did was they changed the whole Sky Miles program and made it actually more challenging for people that fly a lot. And people that take a lot of long flights and made a lot of unpopular changes that actually a lot of long-term loyal customers reacted poorly to, right? Another one of them was a lot of long-time customers have rollover miles that couldn't be included. So they got a lot of negative feedback about it. But one thing I'll give Delta credit for was they did consume all of that feedback, right? And they probably got feedback from different personas through different channels. Like they didn't send a survey out. Like people were emailing the CEO themselves complaining about it. And they did do a good job of closing the loop on that feedback, right? They consumed it all. They understood it and they did reach back out, right? So they took the feedback, they analyzed it. And then I got this email a month later where they acknowledged, and it says a note from Ed Bastian. I'm sure he didn't write it himself, but that was nice to see a note from him. And they acknowledged they got feedback from a lot of customers about the program. And then they made some changes, right? And they took the feedback, they understood the persona of the longtime loyal customer that was getting hurt by some of these changes. And they actually walked back some of them and made it better. So again, it's a good example of a company, even though I'm still not thrilled about the overall changes, I have to give them credit for acknowledging the feedback and having a process to respond specific to the persona that was impacted by this. So those are the examples. I think the last thing just in closing and my thoughts on this is that journey management is, and this is a pun, but journey management is a journey in itself. So I would say if your organization is going through this, like you're not going to be able to, it takes some time to understand all the different pieces of a customer journey. Man, we went through an airline example today because it's something that we feel most people will get. Your organization might be more complex, but it's important to understand that it does take time to understand your overall customer journey and then understand personas. Sue, you brought up a great point that personas change, stages could change. So it's important to constantly reevaluate this stuff. Anything else you want to add to the discussion that we've had? Or any other final thoughts on your end?
No, I wish I could be there in person to respond to questions and off the audience. So while this is great, I'm wishing I could have a question thrown at me from the team.
No worries. I know you got to bounce off, but then I'll say just again, if you'd like to learn more about journey management and how the Question Pro platform can help, feel free to reach out.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.